Hey friends, thanks so much for joining me today. So in this video, I am using Ali Edwards' Stories by the Month kit for the month of February. This kit was actually released in January so that it would arrive in time to people's homes so that they can do their February stories with it. But as so often happens, I'm actually going a little bit back in time and documenting some stories from our family from last February with this kit. So when I first get my kits, I like to open them up and take a look and see all of the different pieces that are included, just like you saw there as I spread all of the pieces out on the table. And then the next thing I do is I go to my computer and I look at my photo library as well as any journaling spots that I might have had from the previous year or from the time frame that I'm looking at. And I try to figure out what stories I want to tell. So this month, with the February Stories by the Month kit, there were 3 stories that I had identified that I wanted to make sure I included in my 2020 album. For 2020, I was using a 6x8 album and kind of using it like a Project Life approach, but I suppose it's not necessarily complete with all of the stories of 2020, so perhaps it's more like a bit of a story album. In any case, it's the way that I'm choosing to tell my stories for February. I have to apologize for the blur here. I promise it's going to get better in about 10 seconds. So, the 3 stories that I wanted to tell from last February were, first of all, there was a love letter that my son wrote to our cat that I found in his backpack, and I'm pretty sure that it was a school assignment. Nevertheless, I loved the words that he included there. So I took a large photo of our cat around the same time that I discovered this love letter was in there. And I also took a photo of the letter itself and then printed a smaller version of that to go right on top of the photo itself. So I wanted to be able to include that because it's his handwriting, and I wanted to be able to capture that at that point in time. So I decided to create a little bit of a pocket to go on top of the photo, and I'm playing around with a couple of ideas here about how I'm going to make this happen. Um, at the weekend that I was working on this, I had been spending some time cleaning out my craft area, and I found these little envelopes, and I was thinking about them as I was putting together this layout. So then I thought, well, maybe I can use this kit to make my own custom envelope. I really loved the 4x6 card with the colorful bubble February letters on it, but I didn't really have a good plan for how I was going to use it in this layout, so it worked out to be the perfect card to go ahead and create a little envelope to go on top of that photo. So I'm really DIYing this here, and I'm trying to do the mental math in my head to figure out what kind of dimensions I'm going to use. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen there that that was the mini envelope that I already had in my workspace, so I'm using that basically as a template to try to recreate my own envelope here and figure out how to make that work. Um, you can do that with really any kind of pattern paper. And the patterns and the fun bits in this kit were a good chance for me to play a little bit more with that. So that's what I'm working on here. My goal or my plans for scrapbooking this year in 2021, my one little word for this year is story. And so I found that, well, you can see even here, I'm telling stories from 2020 still, even in 2021. And my goal this year isn't necessarily to catch up, it isn't to fill in the gaps. What I really want to focus on more than anything is just telling more stories, just getting the words down, getting the photos off of my camera and into my albums, and just having fun with it. No pressure to uh, document like a specific number of things, although I did kind of put on my list my goal for this year was to be able to tell at least 52 stories. I'm hoping that keeping the focus on storytelling will ease the burden of feeling not caught up, because it's like self-induced pressure for sure, but it's something that I find can actually be a barrier to me being more productive if I am worried about staying caught up and failing to meet that, because it's kind of an impossible expectation of myself, self-induced expectation of myself, then I'm more likely just not to do anything at all. So my focus this year and my goal this year is just to tell stories. So my little envelope is pretty much done here. I'm just using some red line tape and I'm sticking it onto the page protector. That enlarged photo is kind of an odd size, and it's because on the flip side of that it is a folded 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and I kind of wanted to be able to just cover that up. So that page protector there with the picture of our cat in it is custom sized. I just used some washi tape to seal up the edge there. I believe that pocket works out to be 5.5 inches wide instead of the standard 6 by 8. So it's still pretty close, but just creates a nice snug fit there for everything. So the wood veneer pieces in this February kit are amazing. They're this lovely bright white, and they're actually quite thick. But they're a good quality, and they don't feel as though they're flimsy in any way. So I was really excited to be able to use a lot of those in my stories that I'm telling here. Next up, I am trying to figure out, so the words that are on the letter that Liam wrote are very small. I love having his handwriting there, but if anyone actually wanted to read what he had written, it's really hard to see what the words are there. So I'm creating a journaling card for myself where I can type the content of the letter so that it's a little bit easier for anyone who would want to read it. I am playing with the idea of using white ink on craft cardstock, and you can see on the left-hand side there I had some old white stays on, but it is old, like really, really, really old. I'm going to say probably around 10 years old or so, and totally dried out. So I went to see what else I had in my stash, and I've got lots of animal friends helping me while I'm working on my projects here. But I'm using the hearts from the stamp set in the February kit to create just a pattern to go on the background there. The white ink on the craft cardstock is kind of a fun effect where the heart stamps, or I guess the images there, aren't fully opaque. You can see a lot of the cardstock coming through in the background. So I actually really like how this turned out. I'm not much of a stamper, and I'm often trying to think of other ways that I can incorporate the stamps into my projects. I like this one. I liked being able just to make a background card for myself. I'm using one of the other cards from the kit just as a template, so I know where to go ahead and cut this out. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is actually run it through my printer so that I can get the journaling on there. You're going to see that in just a second here. The cards in this February kit are some of my very favorites. Even though the physical kit is sold out already, you can still purchase a digital version that includes all of the journaling cards on Ali's site. And I would definitely suggest you check that out if it's something that you're interested in. I'm taking a look at some of the chipboard elements just to see what else I might be able to do to include a little something extra on there. But before I stick down the chipboard, because I need to have something go on the back side of the pocket still, I need to make sure that all of the pockets are filled before I stick the chipboard down, because my plan is to kind of go over the seam there. So the second story that I'm telling with this kit is kind of an around here story for February. I had lots of little square photos, and I don't know if you caught it at the beginning there of the video, but those photos were actually already printed and cropped and in those pockets. So I had started working on this last year, but never got around to wrapping it up. So I did some journaling just with the around here type prompt. And so on the first 3x4 card, I used a plain white piece of cardstock to do a second 3x4 card so that it looks as though it just continues on. And then I used some of the stickers from the kit this month just to create a little pattern on the bottom there. I'm cutting off the extra edge there from those 2x2 squares. And I've got one of the pieces of chipboard and then another piece of wood veneer to fill in the gaps. And I'm using one of the Avery index tabs. The ones that I have in my stash are 1.5 inches. And I'm grabbing one of the stamps again, just the little XOXO stamp from this month, and using that to fill in the tab, just with little, I guess, love stories of around here in February. stamping right across that little divider so that I can put it into the plastic tab there. One of the things that I am guilty of is not always letting the ink dry completely before I start ripping this stuff apart, and sometimes it smudges a little bit. So that would be a word of advice for yourself, just to be a little more patient and give it a minute to dry. Okay, I think I'm moving on to the third story here. And last year, on the Family Day weekend here in Ontario, Canada, or I guess it's the same as the Valentine's weekend last year, we added a new furry family member to our household. He is a cockapoo puppy, and he was not even 7 weeks old yet when we picked him up. Um, and we ended up naming him Jake, but when we first got him, his name originally from his parents there was Mistletoe, and it took probably 5 days or so before we settled on a name for him ourselves. So pretty much for the rest of February 2020, I think pretty much all of our stories are going to be about life with Jake. That means I've got lots of pictures of him there, and I really wanted to make sure that I had this story of bringing him home with us. I was kind of thinking to myself as I was putting this page together, to be perfectly honest, I can't remember if I have the stories of bringing both of my kids home from the hospital after they were born. I know I have Liam's, but I honestly can't remember if I have Emily's or not, so it's probably something I need to do. It'd be kind of awful for our dog to have the story about bringing him home and welcoming him to our family and not actually having my daughter's story in there yet. So making a note to myself to make sure I follow up on that. So, because I've got so many photos and I like to kind of keep them grouped together because they're all part of this same story, I'm going to one of my go-to techniques to be able to include more photos and more words into these 6x8 pages. And that means making a little flip out page using an extra pocket page. I am using an enlarged photo and then basically scoring the edge of a page protector and using adhesive to attach it to the back of that photo and then sandwiching it between another enlarged photo of the same size on the back so that it makes it possible that I can make it like a flip out page basically. And I think you'll see a little bit better what I mean in just a few minutes here when you see the finished project. So I'm breaking this down into a couple of pieces here. The first part of this story is the trust the timing of your life story, because there's a little bit of a story here about the process of deciding or agreeing to get a puppy or a dog in our family. And it started with my son, who has wanted a dog forever. And then gradually over time, I kind of came around to the idea as well. But my husband was the last one to come on board. So I'd say probably by January last year, I was feeling pretty desperate that this was the right time. This is what we should be doing right now. And it took a little while, but it was just after Valentine's Day where he agreed that, yep, okay, let's just do it. If it's going to make everyone in the house happy, that's what we'll do. So that's how Jake ended up with our family. But the other part of this story is that once it was almost like as soon as he said that, everything happened really, really fast. I had had my eye on some opportunities, and I sent a message to a family who had just had this litter of cockapoo puppies who were available and ready to go to their forever homes. So I sent a message that morning, and by that afternoon, we had a puppy, we had a dog. And normally these things do not come together quite that fast. So to me, it was just another sign like it was meant to be. So I'm telling the story about that, and then I'm also telling the story about the experience of just bringing him home with us for the first time. So the focus here is really on the story, the pictures and the words, and explaining how everything came to be. But the products in this kit are just pretty much perfect to be able to support the stories that I want to be able to tell here. February in general is often the time to tell stories about love, and I kind of love the idea that it doesn't have to be love stories about people. It could be about friends, it can be about pets, it could be about just the things that you're loving in your life right now. So there's lots of great ways that you could go ahead and use the elements of this kit to tell different stories about love. On the back side of this is just a favorite photo of my son and Jake when we first, it was our first night at home with him. So I'm keeping it super simple here, and I'm just adding on some of those wood veneer pieces. I'm playing with some of the chipboard pieces and thinking about how else I might want to embellish that. Ultimately, I decided to keep it fairly simple here. There's no journaling on this page, but I can assure you that as I continue telling more stories that will coincide with this experience of adding Jake to our family, there will be lots more words. That's the other thing I wanted to kind of just briefly say, is that there's lots of different ways that you can tell your stories. And sometimes they can be completely word heavy. You might tell a story or do a page that doesn't have any photos at all. It might just be entirely about the words. The opposite of that is just that sometimes the photos tell the stories themselves. And when I look at that picture of my son with Jake in his arms and just pure joy on his face, that's all I need. That's all I need for this story. It's one part of the story, but I think that it kind of, to me anyway, it says it all right there, just that photo. So just something to keep in mind as you are thinking about different ways to tell your stories. Okay, so I am doing another Avery Index tab to create this flip out page, and I'm just getting it set to go on the edge there. And I think I'm just about done with these stories. Next step should be to pop it into my album. Oh, there is one more. There's one more thing that's going to go on here. So I was trying to figure out what I was going to fill in the backside of those 2x2 squares with. Sometimes they can be a bit tricky to figure it out. So I went back to my photo library and I found just a couple more photos of the trip home. After meeting, well, the one picture is us meeting Jake for the first time and Liam playing with him on the floor. And then the other pictures are of the car ride home. So I'm using those to fill in some of the 2x2 squares. And then for the other ones, I'm just looking for some patterns and I just want to play a little bit. So I'm grabbing that 4x6 card that has the diagonal stripes on it in shades of pink and red and gray. And I'm cutting some of those down to 2x2 squares as well. The next step is to figure out what I'm going to do with those pattern squares and if I want to add any journaling. But what I decided to do was to make a placeholder here for the date. I think you're going to see it in just a second because I wasn't sure what to do with the back of that hexagon chipboard shape. So I decided to make that the date one. And you're going to see, because it's adhesive, I can take off that liner and just stick it right to the back of the card. And then I've done it so that I can keep a little strip of the pattern up top. You're going to see it in a second here. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to keep it so that I can keep just a little strip of the pattern at the top, but then keep the white space at the bottom. And it's really convenient because it's sticky backed chipboard, so I can just stick it right onto the card without having to add any other types of adhesive and use my scissors to cut around the outside edges there. So it was just a fun little way to take advantage of those chipboard shapes to be able to continue to use it in another way. So I'm just stamping the date on there as well. And then I considered if I wanted to add something more to it. I didn't really want to include the whole sticker, so I took that circle sticker and just trimmed it down into a little tab so it's more like a word phrase sticker, just of the rectangular shape, and I popped that on there instead. So I guess that's another way to think about using your stickers. If they're not the shape that you want them to be, then go ahead and make them the shape that you do want them to be. The other thing I'm doing is that I really wanted some more of the hearts. I wanted just like a plain white heart, and I used the chipboard backer as a template. So I just took a pencil and traced around the inside shape of those hearts, and then I'm using some scissors to go ahead and cut those out. I'm going to stick those onto the pattern pieces and then use a little bit of adhesive and a little bit of stitching to get them down there. I really like the added dimension and texture that some of the stitching creates, and I'm going to fold up the edges of those hearts so that they lift off the page just a little bit. Of course, when they go into the page protector, they flatten down just a little bit, but I think that you can still see just a little bit of the rise there, and that a little bit of a shadow to create a little bit of added dimension in those squares, in the patterns there. So I'm going to just tuck these guys into the pocket. Just one of the things I'm looking at is the direction that the lines are going. I wanted them to kind of point off in different directions, didn't necessarily want them all to be pointing in the same direction, so it was one of the things I was thinking of. Once I've got all those pockets filled in, I can go ahead and adhere the index tab onto the outer edge there, and that wraps that up. So that's how that whole flip out page works, to keep that group of stories together within the album. And thank you for watching.